The rumble of engines echoed across the highway like distant thunder, a sound that had always signified freedom, brotherhood, and rebellion in the biker world. But for one rider, the road had always carried a heavier burden. Marcus, known to his close friends as Black Rider, had spent years navigating not just the winding roads of America, but also the unspoken rules and prejudices of the biker community. Growing up, Marcus fell in love with motorcycles the first time he heard his uncle's Harley roar to life. It wasn't just the machine, it was what it represented: the open road, endless possibilities, and a community bound by shared passion. But as a black man stepping into a subculture often dominated by unspoken exclusivity, Marcus quickly realized the road wasn't as open as it seemed. He had to earn respect in ways his peers didn't. Every mile he rode, every event he attended, and every interaction carried the weight of proving himself, not just as a biker, but as someone who belonged. Marcus had seen it all. The subtle stares when he walked into a biker bar, the awkward silence when he joined conversations, and even outright challenges from those who didn't believe he could handle the lifestyle. Some riders tried to ignore him. Others outright questioned his presence. But Marcus wasn't just here to ride. He was here to stay. His journey wasn't just about motorcycles. It was about breaking barriers and changing mindsets. And the bike beneath him, with its midnight black paint and roaring engine, became a symbol of that fight. It wasn't all bad. Marcus had found allies along the way, riders who saw him for his passion, not his skin color. There was Julia, a fiery woman with a love for vintage bikes who never hesitated to speak her mind. She'd once told off an entire group at a rally for making a racist joke, and she didn't care about the glares that followed. Then there was Hector, a Latino rider with a booming laugh and a knack for building bikes from scratch, who knew all too well what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. Together, they formed a small but tight-knit crew that Marcus called his second family. But the journey was far from easy. The biker world has long been romanticized as a place where people of all backgrounds come together, bound by the love of the road. Yet beneath the chrome and leather, there were unspoken divides. Marcus had heard stories, some too ugly to repeat, of black riders being excluded from clubs, of rallies where Confederate flags flew proudly, and of whispered words that no one dared to say aloud. He didn't just want to ride through this world. He wanted to change it. One rally in particular had stuck with him. It was one of the biggest in the country, a place where riders from all over came to celebrate their shared passion. Marcus had been excited. It was supposed to be a symbol of unity. Instead, he found himself standing on the edge of a crowd, watching as groups naturally segregated, old tensions bubbling beneath the surface. A drunken biker had stumbled up to him, slurring words Marcus wished he could forget, and it took every ounce of restraint not to escalate the situation. That night, as he sat by his tent under the stars, he made a vow. He wouldn't just be a rider. He'd be a voice. Now Marcus was preparing for his biggest challenge yet, a cross-country journey to unite riders of all backgrounds and spark a conversation about racism in the biker world. It wasn't just a ride, it was a mission. He planned to visit clubs, attend rallies, and meet with riders from every corner of the country. Along the way, he'd share his story, listen to theirs, and document it all to shine a light on the good, the bad, and the in-between. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, maybe even hostility. But Marcus also believed in the power of the road to bring people together. After all, every biker knows that no matter who you are or where you're from, the road doesn't discriminate. It's the people who do. The morning he set out, the sky was overcast and the air carried the promise of rain. Marcus strapped his gear onto his bike and took a deep breath. This wasn't just a journey for himself. It was for every rider who had ever felt like they didn't belong. It was for the future generation of bikers who deserved a world where the only thing that mattered was the ride. He revved his engine, the sound cutting through the silence, and pulled onto the highway. But as he rode into the unknown, he couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Would he find the unity he was searching for, or would the walls prove too high to break down? Only time, and the road ahead, would tell. The road stretched endlessly before Marcus, the hum of his engine blending with the wind rushing past his helmet. He had always found peace in the ride, just him, his bike, and the open highway. But this journey wasn't just about the thrill of the road. It was about something deeper, something heavier. He was chasing a dream that some people didn't believe was possible. A true brotherhood in the biker world, where respect was earned by the ride, not dictated by race. His first stop was a small town in Texas, where an old friend, Big Mike, ran a garage that doubled as a gathering spot for local bikers. Mike was a white man in his late 50s, built like a bear, with hands rough from years of fixing bikes. He had always treated Marcus like a brother, but even he knew that the culture wasn't as welcoming to everyone. As Marcus pulled up, the scent of oil and gasoline filled the air, mixing with the sound of laughter and clinking beer bottles. A few heads turned, some nodding in acknowledgement, others taking a second look before returning to their conversations. Inside, Mike greeted him with a strong handshake and a grin. "Didn't think you'd actually do it, brother," Mike said, wiping grease off his hands. "Trying to change the biker world. That's a tall order." "Somebody's got to do it," Marcus replied. "Might as well be me." Mike led him to the back, where a few riders sat around a table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They weren't hostile, but Marcus could tell that some weren't sure what to make of his mission. "You really think you can change how people think?" one of them asked, an older man with silver hair and faded tattoos. "Some things have been the way they are for a long time." Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I don't expect to change the world overnight," he said. "But I do believe people can change. I've seen it happen. And I know not everyone's a racist, but ignoring the problem isn't the same as fixing it." Silence hung in the air for a moment before Mike spoke. "He's right," he said, his voice steady. "I've been in this world for decades. I've seen good men get treated like outsiders just 'cause they didn't fit the mold. That ain't brotherhood." Some of the men nodded, others looked away. Marcus could feel the tension, not anger, but discomfort. He knew this conversation wasn't easy, but that was the point. Later that night, as he sat outside by his bike, Julia called. "How's it going so far?" she asked. "Slow," Marcus admitted. "A few open minds, but a lot of resistance." "That's expected," she said. "But remember, change doesn't start with a crowd. It starts with one person willing to speak up." He sighed, looking up at the stars. "Yeah, just gotta keep pushing." The next few weeks were a mix of progress and setbacks. In some towns, he met riders who welcomed the conversation, who admitted they had never thought about what it was like to be a minority in the biker world. In others, he faced outright hostility. Bars that suddenly stopped serving when he walked in, clubhouses that made it clear he wasn't welcome. One encounter in particular stuck with him. He had stopped at a well-known rally, a massive gathering of bikers from all over the country. As he walked through the sea of bikes, he noticed how naturally people divided, certain groups sticking together, some riders avoiding eye contact altogether. Then a man in a leather vest approached him. His patches showed he was part of a long-established club, one with a reputation for being old school. "You lost?" the man asked, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. "Nope," Marcus said evenly. Just here for the rally, same as you. The man studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Just making sure, he said before walking away. Marcus exhaled, his grip tightening around his helmet. It wasn't an outright threat, but the message was clear. You don't belong here. Later that night, as he sat by his tent, he found himself questioning everything. Was he really making a difference? Was this fight even worth it? He had known it would be tough, but the weight of it all was starting to settle in his bones. That's when Hector arrived, rolling up on his custom-built chopper with a smirk. "Look at you, all deep in thought," he teased, tossing Marcus a beer. "Don't tell me you're getting tired already." Marcus shook his head, chuckling despite himself. "Just wondering if this is all pointless." Hector cracked open his beer. "You ever hear that saying, the first guy through the wall always gets the bloodiest?" Marcus nodded. "That's you right now," Hector said. "But you're still standing, and that means something." As the fire crackled between them, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still long, still uncertain. But if there was one thing he knew, it was this. Real change never came easy. And he wasn't turning back now. The fire crackled low as Marcus sat back, staring into the flickering flames. The weight of the journey still pressed on his shoulders, but Hector's words lingered in his mind. The first guy through the wall always gets the bloodiest. It was true. Every town, every rally, every conversation had felt like a battle. But the war wasn't over yet. He had one last stop. A national biker gathering was happening in a few days, one of the biggest in the country. Thousands of riders would be there, including members from clubs that had been around for decades. Some welcomed change, but others held on to the past like rusted chains. This was where Marcus would make his stand. If he could open even a few minds here, it would mean something. As he rode into the rally grounds, the energy in the air was electric. Rows of bikes stretched as far as the eye could see, the deep rumble of engines mixing with the scent of leather and gasoline. He spotted familiar faces, some friendly, some not. Julia and Hector were already there, waiting near a row of parked bikes. "You ready for this?" Julia asked, adjusting her jacket. Marcus took a deep breath, glancing around. "Not really," he admitted, "but let's do it anyway." They made their way toward the main gathering area, where riders were talking, laughing, sharing stories. Marcus knew what he had to do. It wasn't about speeches or calling people out. It was about starting real conversations. One by one, he approached different groups, not as a preacher, but as a fellow rider. Some were open to talking. Others weren't. "You're wasting your time," one man said, shaking his head. "Bikers don't change." Marcus smiled, tapping the gas tank of his bike. People said the same thing about motorcycles once. They thought they'd never evolve. But look around. New bikes, new technology, new ways to ride. Change is part of life, man. The man didn't say anything at first. Then he nodded, just slightly, before turning back to his beer. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the night went on, Marcus realized something important. The real change wasn't going to come from some dramatic moment. It wasn't about proving a point in one conversation. It was about showing up, about riding through the discomfort, about being there, visible, undeniable. The moment of truth came when an old-school biker, one of the veterans of the scene, approached him. The man was in his 60s, his face lined with years of sun, wind, and road dust. He had been watching Marcus all day. "You've been stirring things up," the man said, his voice rough but not unkind. Marcus met his gaze, just trying to make the road a little wider. The man studied him for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Took guts to come here and do what you're doing." Not everybody will admit it, but respect is earned. And you earned mine." With that, he extended his hand. Marcus shook it, feeling the weight of the moment. Later that night, as he sat with Julia and Hector, he felt something shift. Not in the world, maybe, but in himself. The fight wasn't over. It probably never would be, but he had done what he came to do. As he packed up the next morning, a few riders came over, some to shake his hand, some just to nod in silent respect. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. As Marcus rode out of the rally, the road stretched ahead, endless as always. The biker world wasn't perfect, but maybe, just maybe, it was ready for change, and he would keep riding until it was.